Hi, wee Bob here. So today I am going to give you a full introduction to Rebelle 6, so I hope you enjoy it. So I have spent well over 1,000 hours on Rebelle software over the past year, and I have been doing digital art for many years. I don't imagine finding another digital art painting package that is as good as Rebelle to get the results which I have searched for years through Photoshop, to Clip Studio Paint, to Sketchbook, and then eventually somebody mentioned Rebelle to me and I haven't looked back really since. So let's get straight into this. When you open up Rebelle 6, you start with this new artwork page. You can open up your recent artwork or from your file system. We've got our canvas size here, which we can change and customize to the size that we want, and over here we can choose our canvas. We can change the colour, texture and texture scale in this panel. We can also choose to have the paper textured at the edges or not using the deckled edge checkbox. More paper textures are available from Escape Motions if we want, and you can import your own textures, and although there appears to be some interaction with the imported textures, it will not have the NanoPixel look, and I believe these are only available from Escape Motions. So we click OK, and as we can see, we've got our paper here. We can change our canvas at any point, even after finishing a painting. We would click the canvas button and we can either choose a completely different canvas or change the texture as shown. You might want to do this when going to print on an actual textured paper. You would probably want to remove the texture that's on the canvas before you go to print. Up here we've got our brushes, we've got oils, express oils, watercolors, inks, pencils, pastels, markers and airbrushes. We've then got some other independent tools that are independent of the brushes, and below these tools is the brush properties box. And then we have a selection of brush tips that we can choose from. If I choose an oil brush, and if we have previously made changes to our default brush, we can reset to the brush preset using this icon, or we can continue with the brush as we last left it. We can choose colour from the colour set panel and paint on our canvas. The first button here will save the brush presets, so basically save the size and paint on my brush as the default value, or allow you to save as a brand new brush. There are some bugs in some of the versions of Rebelle, so just keep an eye out that you're not thinking you're doing something and it's not actually happening. I believe they're going to work through and fix some of these issues. Now there are two buttons located here when an oil brush is selected. The first button here is a multicoloured brush. Basically means when I add a colour and then change to the next colour, the next brush stroke will have some of that previous colour still on the brush tip. It will run out. The dirty brush means that so this is the other icon, the dirty brush icon. It means that your paintbrush picks up other colours from the canvas as you start to paint, and it will automatically see this as you having chose a different colour from the palette. You can see the colour history here, and as we go across the canvas you can see that changing. There are 4 different painting modes here, and we have paint, paint and mix, paint and blend, and blend. Then we've got an eraser. For oil, my suggestion is that if you're trying to mix paint, then use the dirty brush icon along with one of the other painting modes. This one is going to be a bit down to yourself to experiment. I have had kind of varying results with this, trying to get what I think is going to happen, and then it's sort of different from what I would expect based on the descriptions. So determine what setup is giving you the results you're looking for and go from there, experiment. There is now an option to limit the length that the paint will last for. To get this menu, we click the little hamburger icon and click show sliders and then length. The length slider is now shown and we can make the changes as illustrated. Before we move on from oils, I want to highlight the visual settings menu. This can be accessed through Window and then Visual Settings. When active, we see this panel, and for oils we have a few sliders here, impasto depth and gloss. As you can see, altering these gives us control over the look of the oil on the canvas, the depth, the glossiness. For the other visual settings we will discuss some of them a bit later, and I have other videos on my channel in Rebelle 5 going into these in further detail, but the difference between Rebelle 5 and Rebelle 6, there's not really any difference, it's just new features have been added to Rebelle 6. We will be going towards watercolors a bit later in this video, but just now I want to bring your attention to one of the new features of Rebelle 6, and that is grids and guides and reference image guides. Here I have a photo of a face looking up, but I'm unsure how to get the correct dimensions. I can use various parts of Rebelle 6 to help me. So first off, let's look at a basic grid that we can apply. So we go to the view menu, then show, then click grid. As you can see, we now have a grid. The grid that we get can be altered in the edit then preferences menu. Once clicked, we will see this panel and we can select grids and guides and make all sorts of changes to what is shown. With the grid though, we can now use it to help us with our reference to measure off and try to duplicate on our canvas what we can see based on that things that are drawn within the boxes. It is such a great way to get sizing from an image without direct tracing. So let's talk about one of my favourite features, and that is reference image guides. To get reference image guides shown, we go to view, show, then reference image guides. We don't see any changes here, but when we bring up our references using window, then reference images, we can then drag and drop a reference image from our folders into this panel. We can hit the eye icon to show a new panel where we can do a few things. We can use a colour picker, we can bring the reference image back to the panel size, we can flip horizontal, flip vertical, we can, if the image had colour, make it grayscale. We can then hit the eye icon to show a low opacity version on our canvas. We can then resize this, and then the big deal is being able to add reference guides to our images. This saves measuring and obviously would then be more accurate. If we change to a darker canvas, we can change the reference image guide, look and edit preferences, then the colour tab. Down to the bottom, we can change the colour size, opacity, and as shown. We then have these to guide us on our way to our new painting. The grids and guides can also help us to align objects if we are perhaps doing some illustration with equal spacing between our paintings, or we're just looking to kind of align things according to a grid or to a guide. So let's talk about watercolors and the amazing results we can achieve in Rebelle 6 when it comes to these tools. We've got paint, which basically just adds paint to the canvas without any mix. With paint and mix, which when you do it lightly, it will pick up some of the other colour that's already on the paper. I prefer this paint and blend, which I use it to mix better on the canvas, and we then just get a plain blender, which means there's no paint on the brush. You are just blending what is already on the paper on the canvas. So you can blend out that colour almost like a swatch. We'll then get an eraser, which is a really handy because you can choose different tips for your eraser. So I can erase these as splats into place, or if I wanted some of this outline in a different way. We then have inking brushes, which helps us outline detail, but be aware the first 4 brush types are wet media and will put water onto the canvas. The last 4 are dry media and do not add water. However, if water is on the canvas or added, they will still be affected. And this has caught me out a few times. I have been busy painting away and a girl's eye starts looking like the guy at the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. The brush properties box stays kind of the same for all brushes. The main thing you need to look at is the water slider, or in the case of oils, the slider is oiliness. This affects the mixing behaviour, but there are more complex mechanics of oils in the brush creator panel. The first independent tool is blending, which is just a blender, and the good thing is we can choose different tips for the end of our blender, and it can give us some really nice kind of smudgy effects on the paper. We've then got smudge, and which will smudge the paint over the paper. You've got this smudge tool in Rebelle 5, but the big difference in Rebelle 6 is we now have additional tools attached to this icon, but I'm going to talk about them again a wee bit later in this video. We've got our clone tool where we can clone the image and make some really cool results. The eraser seems self-explanatory, but you can choose different erase options. So if I wanted to add some kind of snowy effect to the hair or some sort of effect, then I can use my eraser. We have the fill paint bucket, which does what it says on the tin. We then get the dropper brush, which lets us select any colour on the paper. We've got undo and redo. We then have the wet the paper tool, which I'm going to go into in a minute when we start talking about watercolours. We've got a typical selection box where we can choose different shapes and magic wand, and we can invert, add, subtract to a selection on our canvas. So if I choose above the girl's head and I use the move tool, which is the next tool, I can take that somewhere else on the screen. I can flip it and do various things to it. We can deselect it, select all, for example. The selection tool and move tool need to really be used together, and use of the two properly will help you with some of the newer tools in Rebelle 6, especially if you have an older computer like me. We've got our move tool, which again now has additional features that we will get on to. We've got the crop tool. We can crop the image. If we zoom out, we can then see these little handles, and we can crop the image. Say we just want this part of the image, and we can hit the enter key and it will crop the full image. Just watch, that's a destructive process. Save your work, save an extra file, save A version, B version. If you've ever seen my file names, there's like A, B, C, D, E. I make lots of different versions of the same file, which does use up a lot of space. So let's start talking about watercolor. We can then see we've got our panel here and we've got our watercolor brushes as discussed. Now, if I add a lot of water to the brush, and I will bring up the opacity, let's choose round 2 as a brush type, and I've chosen a red colour. That is now a watery painted surface. Over on the right here, we've got our layers panel. We've talked a wee bit about it, but we can show the wet layer from this button. This shows you everything that's wet on the page. We've got a pause, which unpauses or pauses the simulation of the watercolour, or the diffusion, as escape motions call it within the software. We can wet the layer, wet all visible, dry the layer, and we can use a fast dry icon that is for soaking up excess water but allows the canvas to remain wet. So if I unpause the simulation, you see the watercolour effect starting to take place. Now we can tilt the watercolour using this gadget. We can tilt the water in all different directions. We've also got settings where we can add the drips, and this is a drip coming off here. We've got a granulation, which I'll show you an example of just now. Now, if you want to see how watercolour simulation can be altered, I did quite a recent video in Rebelle 5 going into quite a lot of detail about watercolour and how to get different things from the visual settings. I will leave a link at the end of this video, perhaps in the description. There are other videos on my channel which show you these details. Before we get into the colour menu, let's talk about some keyboard shortcuts. So Ctrl Z will undo, Ctrl Shift Z will redo. If we hold the spacebar down, we can move the canvas around our screen. If we hold down the Control key and we move our brush left or right, we can change the brush size. If we do the same, hold the Control key and go up and down, we can change the opacity of the brush. The F key is a handy keyboard shortcut for getting that fast dry rather than trying to click it with the mouse or click it with your pen. We can use Shift to get the ruler, and this ruler feature is probably one of the best I've came across. One of the most intuitive rulers compared to other software. And there is also a perspective tool where you can do 1 point, 2 point and 3 point perspective as illustrated. So let's talk about the colour palette over on the right hand side, and we've got a colour tab which gives us a colour wheel, and we've got a colour set. Now if I pull the colour set out, you use the blue text to do that. Click and drag on the blue text, and if I expand this out, what you can see is those different colour palettes that I've got downloaded. I've made a new colour palette here. We can make new ones from images using this menu. So we choose an image that we like. Let's go for 25 colours of this alien Sigourney Weaver image. Yes, this is the same one I used in my last video. And open it, and it automatically creates me a nice lovely palette with all the hex codes associated with those colours. We do have a lot of other sets available to us. We've got a watercolour set, and all the names are similar to those that you would find in a traditional art set. We can choose from some of these other palettes that are available as default. For example, we've got a body one here for doing skin tones, we've got a grayscale one, and we can create a new set just by clicking this button down here, and then we can drag and drop colours as we see fit, as we want to. So say I like this colour here, I can literally just drag and drop that colour into our new set, and the process can just be repeated. You can delete colour sets, duplicate colour sets, and I'm just going to redock this, and we can just redock it by pulling it across. But if you want it to become a tab, it needs to go in beside rather than above, where it can take up a wee bit more space than you would maybe perhaps want. So what about those big new features in Rebelle 6 compared with Rebelle 5? Well, let's take some time to look at these. Let's start with what was previously the smudge tool, and now under the smudge icon we have here a new set of tools in Rebelle 6 compared to Rebelle 5. We still have the basic smudge, which can be used to great effect. The big new feature is the liquify tools. We have liquify push, which pushes the paint around that's already on the canvas. We have the expand version, which if used with low strength, or as the slider is called, opacity, we can make subtle changes to our existing painting and make things larger. We have the pinch tool, which does the opposite effect to the expand. We've got the push left liquify tool, which gives us this cool effect, and it pushes the paint in a direction based on the way that you move the brush, and it's best to experiment with this one and figure out how it works. As a big word of caution, I would suggest that you use the liquify tool on a newly saved version of your drawing, or a duplicated version of your layer. The main reason for this is during making this video I used these tools on a previous painting, and a glitch happened and I wasn't able to undo it. So yeah, you can see Gizmo here, and he's got big googly eyes, which thankfully he doesn't have in real life, because that would be quite horrifying. So liquify twirl is the last tool, and it can give us some really funky effects and sometimes quite disturbing, to be honest. I mean, I don't know what's happening here with this face. This last tool is for reconstructing or an analog type of undo to the liquifying that we have done. In these examples I have used this tool to the extreme, but if we reduce the opacity and use these tools in a more calm way, we can achieve nice alterations to our existing work. We can create new brushes for the liquify tool, which may give us some other interesting results, and if I make any good brushes, there's a good chance I will make a video on what weird effects I've managed to achieve. So the next feature of Rebelle 6 that we are going to look at is the warp transform. So under our existing move tool, we have this additional icon now. The icon actually changes to move or warp depending on what you have selected, so just be aware that the actual icon changes. We can select warp, and then there is this split slider which allows us to split the canvas into segments that can be altered as shown. Due to my old computer, which Rebelle 5 and Rebelle 6 work pretty well on, I have to use a selection box, select a part of the painting that I want to use, and this seems to give me better results based on my computer being a bit slow. As you can see from these results, we can seriously change the look of our character later in the process, or just experiment to get different emotions. The move tool has now got the addition of the fractal transform, which helps us upscale perhaps smaller objects we have drawn to a bigger size. There are three types of transform: nearest, bilinear and fractal. Now fractal's this new one, and I believe it's in the pro version only. The differences are shown on the screen, and you can see that the fractal definitely provides more definition if we are upscaling smaller items. And like I mentioned in my features video, it's a wee bit like Blu-ray and DVDs being upscaled, taking existing information and trying to use some sort of maths to figure out what it should look like when we make it bigger. There is so much new in Rebelle 6 that the chances of me doing a 10-minute version of this video doesn't really seem possible. We're going to keep going. The new filters. So the first filter we are going to try out is the Gaussian blur. And I really hope that's how you say that word, Gaussian, or is it Gaussian? And again, I'm going to use this girl at the bar painting that I completed back in July 2020, probably in Photoshop, but I've brought it into Rebelle and we're going to mess around using these filters. and we can get a really great blurry background effect, making the character pop and the background just have that kind of cinematic look to it where you're trying to focus in on the centerpiece of the painting or of the shot. The next filter is lens blur, and I'm going to be honest, I have been struggling with this filter in terms of knowing what results to expect. It runs quite slowly on my PC, but it appears to be a filter that takes the lighter parts of your drawing and enhances them, sometimes with funky shapes like the heart-based reflection. Like I said, I am struggling with this feature to fully explain, but it did give me some great kind of results but I wasn't really quite sure what I was doing. So certainly one that will need more experimentation. The last of the filters here is sharpen, which is pretty much straightforward, but on my PC it does take some time for the results to show up. Just make sure you check out those recommended computer requirements. The brush creator tool can be seen here, and we have access to all sorts of amazing sliders and checkboxes. At the moment I haven't had enough time to see what Rebelle 6 brings to brush creation, and there is a lot of things to go through, which, as mentioned in my last video, will be for another video at some point in the future. But just know this is a very powerful part of the software, being able to create your own brushes and make different things happen with them. And it will take a bit of time to get through that. So let's move on to another feature. We have line smoothing available in Rebelle 6 and Rebelle 5. If you want to smooth out lines for comic-based paintings, for me, I love the front of GTA, Grand Theft Auto artwork where you can see the outline of the person, and this is a great feature which would help you achieve that. It can also be used with many of the newer liquify type tools to give nice effects to our paintings. The pigment button here is a pretty big deal in the way that colour mixes. It is only available in the Pro version. Having done digital art for many years, we do tend to find that when we mix, for example, blue and yellow, the colour mixing seems to head towards a grey colour. With this pigment button now available, our mixing of colours becomes a lot more like real life. We have the layers panel here, where we can change the opacity of the layer, lock the layer, add masking fluid to the layer. We can show or hide our layer using the eye icon, change the canvas, which we have discussed, export to Photoshop, add new layer, group layers, duplicate layers, merge layers, and delete layers. There is also a tracing layer, which I've never really used. So layer masks are not something I have used much before, but having had a bit of time to experiment over the past few days in Rebelle 6, I am impressed. In Rebelle 6 we can now add layer masks and clipping masks. To add a clipping mask, we have painting here and we right click and choose clipping mask, but we need at least 2 layers to add a clipping mask as shown. The layer below can then be used to determine the opacity of the layer above using grayscale values from black to white. This is great as it is non-destructive to our painting. A few times I have tried to use the eraser, but you actually have to paint in black or white for this to work, just in case you get a bit confused. Layer mask works sort of similar, but we don't need an additional layer as we now have this layer added to the right of our thumbnail. One thing though is that we can't see our layer mask, unlike the clipping mask where you can more or less paint at full size. If you're interested in a more in-depth look at watercolors or visual settings, there's this video up in the corner, but there are other videos on my channel talking about Rebelle 5, all of which still have features that are in Rebelle 6. Thanks for watching, and Wee Bob is out.